I didn't know his name at first. I didn't even know his face. I only knew the sound of someone crying when they believed the world wasn't listening. It always came after midnight. Never earlier, never loud enough to complain about. Just soft, controlled breaths breaking in places where breathing should have been easy. The kind of crying people learn when they've cried too much in the past. The kind that doesn't ask for help because it has already learned help doesn't always come. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Apartments collect sounds the way people collect memories. Pipes hum, floors creak, doors slam. Someone somewhere always drops something at 2 in the morning. But this wasn't noise. This was pain, shaped carefully into silence. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks like constellations, and through the wall, so thin it felt like a shared skin, I'd hear it. A breath that hitched, then stopped. A pause. Another breath. As if whoever it was kept reminding himself not to make it worse, not to let it spill. Some nights, I held my pillow over my head. Not because the sound annoyed me, but because it felt wrong to listen to something so private. Like overhearing a confession not meant for human ears. Other nights, I didn't cover my ears at all. I just listened. Because once you hear pain like that, you don't really forget it. It sits with you. It makes your chest heavy for reasons you can't explain. I started wondering who lived next door. The apartment had been empty for months before someone moved in. I remembered because the silence back then had been different. Empty silence is clean. Lonely silence has weight. This one had weight. I tried to picture him because somehow I knew it was a him. I don't know why. Maybe it was the quiet restraint, the carefulness, the way the crying never turned into sound but stayed trapped behind teeth and breath. I imagined someone older, someone used to carrying things alone, someone who knew how to clean up after his own heartbreak without letting anyone see the mess. I imagined someone who had learned over time that pain is more acceptable when you don't make it visible. The crying didn't happen every night. That scared me more. Because it meant there were nights when whatever he was holding inside became too heavy to carry quietly. Nights when sleep wouldn't come no matter how tired he was. Nights when loneliness pressed so tightly against his ribs that silence stopped working. On those nights, I'd lie awake and wonder what kind of pain teaches a person to cry so carefully. What kind of past tells someone that even breaking down must be done politely? I wondered if he had someone. The apartment was quiet otherwise. No laughter, no shared footsteps, no arguments drifting through the walls. Just one set of sounds, one life. Contained.
The day after I saw him in the hallway, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he held his stomach. Not gently, not casually, protectively, like the world had already proven it couldn't be trusted. I told myself not to overthink it. People lived full lives behind closed doors. It wasn't my place to wonder what had brought him here, alone, pregnant, crying into the night, like his pain needed permission to exist. Still, I found myself listening more carefully that evening. Not eagerly, not curiously, carefully, like someone afraid of missing a sound that mattered. But the night stayed quiet. No muffled sobs, no broken breaths, just the dull hum of the building settling into sleep. It should have relieved me. Instead, it made me uneasy. Silence can be heavy when you know what it's hiding. I lay awake longer than usual, staring at the dark, replaying that brief glimpse of him in my mind. The oversized hoodie, the tired slump of his shoulders, the way he didn't look up, like eye contact might cost him something he couldn't afford to lose. When morning came, it came too quickly. I went through my routine on autopilot: shower, coffee, keys, but my thoughts lagged behind me. When I stepped into the hallway, I caught myself glancing at his door. Closed. Quiet. Nothing to prove he was real, except the memory and the empty space where the crying used to be. I told myself to stop looking. At work, I made careless mistakes. Read the same email 3 times without understanding it. More than once, I caught myself wondering if he'd eaten anything, if he had someone checking on him, if the silence meant rest or resignation. I hated those thoughts. They felt intrusive, but they wouldn't leave. That evening, I came home later than usual. The sky was already dark, the hallway lit by flickering lights that always seemed just a second away from burning out. I was unlocking my door when I heard it. A soft, shaky exhale. I turned. His door was open just a crack, light spilling into the hallway. He stood there barefoot, one hand on the doorframe, the other resting on his stomach again. Up close, he looked smaller somehow, thinner. His face was pale, lips pressed together like he was bracing himself. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Surprise flickered in his eyes, then something sharper. Fear, maybe, or shame. It was hard to tell. He looked like someone who'd been caught in the middle of something deeply personal. "Sorry," he said quickly, voice low. I didn't mean to." "You didn't do anything," I said without thinking. The words came out too fast. He blanked. "I just... the door," he murmured, glancing behind him as if embarrassed by the space he lived in. I nodded, though I hadn't tried to look inside. "I'm Men," I said, "from next door." A pause. "Jay," he replied. The name fit him in a way I couldn't explain. His hand tightened slightly on the doorframe. I noticed then how tired his eyes were. Not just sleepy, but worn, like rest alone wouldn't fix what they'd seen. "I can help with the door," I offered, "if you want." Another pause. Longer this time. Then he nodded. Just once. "Okay." I stepped closer, careful not to crowd him. The lock was old, the kind that needed pressure at the right angle. It took me only a moment to adjust it. "There," I said. "Should work better now." "Thank you," he said quietly. He didn't move to close the door. Neither did I move away. The silence between us stretched, not awkward, just uncertain, like both of us were waiting to see who would speak first, or if speaking was even necessary. "You live alone?" he asked suddenly, I still not meeting mine. "Yes." "Me too." The way he said it made it sound less like a fact and more like a confession. Another silence. Then, almost against my will, I said, "If you need anything, anything at all, you can knock." Jay finally looked up. For a second, something raw crossed his face. Vulnerability, sharp and unguarded. Then it vanished, replaced by polite distance. "That's kind of you," he said. "Kind, not necessary." He nodded once more and closed the door gently. That night, there was no crying. But I didn't sleep easily. Because now, the sound through the wall had a name. A face. A life that felt far too fragile to ignore. And I knew, somehow, that the quiet between us was only the beginning.
Inside his apartment, everything felt temporary. Not messy, not unfinished, just temporary. Like a place someone stayed in because they had nowhere else to go, not because they wanted to belong there. The air smelt faintly of detergent and something warm, instant soup maybe. The furniture was minimal: a small table, 2 chairs that didn't match, a couch pushed against the wall. No decorations, no photos, no personal chaos. The kind of space that said, "I might leave any time." Or maybe I don't expect anyone to stay. Sorry, Jay said quietly, as if the emptiness were something he needed to apologize for. It's fine, I replied, though the word felt too small for what I was actually feeling. He moved slowly, carefully, like each step required permission from his body. I noticed the way his breathing changed when he sat down, the way his hand rested on his stomach again without thinking. Not dramatic, instinctive, protective. We stood awkwardly for a moment before he gestured to the chair. You can sit, if you want. I sat. The silence settled in, thick but not uncomfortable. It felt different from the silence through the wall. This one wasn't hiding pain. It was holding it gently, like both of us were afraid one wrong word might shatter something fragile. I'm Jay, he said finally. His voice was soft, almost careful, like he didn't want the sound of his own name to echo too loudly. Men. That was all. No last names, no explanations, no questions about where we came from or where we were going. Just two names, floating between us, disconnected from stories that felt too heavy to tell. I expected more conversation to follow. People usually fill silence when they're nervous. But Jay didn't rush it. He looked at his hands instead, fingers rubbing together slowly, as if grounding himself. I wondered how long it had been since someone sat across from him like this. Not to judge, not to demand answers, just present. You don't have to stay long, he said after a while. I know. But neither of us moved. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt honest. No television noise, no background distraction to avoid thinking. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sounds of traffic outside the window. It made everything feel closer, more real. I caught myself looking around again, not out of curiosity this time, but concern. The fridge looked small, the cupboards barely used. There was a stack of unopened mail on the counter, medical papers tucked beneath them, edges visible. Jay noticed my glance and stiffened slightly. I'm managing, he said quickly, as if responding to a question I hadn't asked. I didn't say anything, I replied gently. He relaxed a little, then nodded. Sorry, he murmured. People look and they start thinking things. I thought of the crying through the wall, of the careful way he broke down only when he thought he was alone. I'm not good at thinking for other people, I said honestly. I just listen. He looked at me then, really looked at me. There was something searching in his gaze, like he was trying to decide if my words were true or just polite. After a moment, he looked away. That's probably better, he said. Time passed strangely after that. Not slow, not fast, just suspended. Like we were both inside a moment neither of us knew how to name. Eventually, I stood. I should go, I said, but if the door gives you trouble again, let me know. He nodded. Thank you, man. It wasn't just a thank you for the door. I could hear that much. When I stepped back into the hallway, the door closed behind me with a soft click. Not hurried, not hesitant, intentional. As I walked back to my apartment, something felt different. Not obvious, not dramatic, just a shift, like the air itself had changed. When I closed my own door and leaned against it, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The building felt less lonely. The walls didn't feel as hollow. The silence didn't feel as heavy. 2 apartments, 2 names, no stories yet. But somehow, knowing that Jay existed, not as a sound, not as a shadow, but as a person, made the night feel survivable. Later, when I lay in bed, I waited for the crying. It didn't come. And for the first time since he moved in, I hoped, quietly, carefully, that maybe he wasn't crying because he didn't need to anymore. Or maybe he finally knew someone was listening. The next day, I cooked extra. I didn't plan to. At least, that's what I kept telling myself as I stood in the kitchen, watching steam rise from the pot. I followed the same recipe I always did, measured the same way I always had. But my hands moved differently. I added more without thinking. More rice, more vegetables, enough for two, whether I admitted it or not. It felt easier to believe it was an accident. An excuse is sometimes the only way people allow themselves to care. I packed the food into a container and sealed it carefully, as if the tightness of the lid could somehow protect the intention behind it. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at it on the counter. My reflection in the dark window looked unsure, conflicted, like I was about to cross a line I hadn't agreed to. It's just food, I told myself. People share food all the time. Still, my heart beat faster as I stepped into the hallway. His door stood exactly where it always did. Ordinary, quiet, unassuming. I hesitated, then knocked. Softly. Once. A few seconds passed, then footsteps. Slow. Cautious. The door opened halfway. Jay peeked out, eyes widening slightly when he saw me. He looked tired, like sleep hadn't visited him properly, but there was a bit more color in his face today. Or maybe I was imagining it. "Hi," I said. The word felt strangely important. "Hi," he replied, equally unsure. "I made too much food," I said quickly, holding the container out in front of me like proof. "Thought you might want some." For a moment, he didn't move. His gaze dropped to the container. Stayed there. Long enough that I almost pulled it back, worried I'd misread everything. Then his expression shifted, not dramatically, not in any way that demanded attention, but something loosened in his face. His eyes softened, his lips parted slightly, like he wanted to say more than he ended up allowing himself to. He stared at the food like it meant more than just a meal, like it meant someone had thought of him. "Thank you," he said. His voice came out quiet, steady, but his shoulders dropped, just a little, as if some invisible weight had been lifted. As if, for a brief moment, he could stop holding himself together so tightly. "You don't have to eat it now," I added, suddenly afraid of pushing too much, or at all. I mean, only if you want to. "I do," he said quickly. Then, softer, I will." He opened the door wider. The apartment looked the same as yesterday. Temporary, careful, but warmer somehow. Maybe because I was standing there with something meant to be shared. Maybe because he let me stand there at all. "I didn't plan anything fancy," I said, stepping inside when he gestured me in. "Just normal food." "That's okay," he replied. "Normal is good." He set the container on the table and hovered near it, hands resting on the edge, like he wasn't sure what to do next. I watched him closely, noticing how his movement slowed when he stood too long, how one hand, again without thinking, found its way to his stomach. "You should sit," I said. He hesitated, then nodded and eased himself into the chair with a quiet exhale. When he opened the container, the smell filled the room. He inhaled deeply, eyes closing for just a second before he could stop himself. That moment, small and unguarded, made my chest ache. He took his first bite carefully. His eyes widened just a little. "It's good," he said. I smiled before I could stop myself. We ate together, mostly in silence. Not the awkward kind, just the kind that didn't ask to be filled. I noticed how slowly he ate, like he didn't trust the food to last, like rushing might make it disappear. Halfway through, he paused. "I haven't cooked much lately," he admitted, staring at the container. "It's harder when it's just you." I understood that more than I wanted to admit. "Food tastes different when it's shared," I said. He glanced up at me, surprised. "Yeah," he murmured, "it really does." When it was time to leave, I stood and reached for the empty container. He stopped me. "I'll wash it," he said. "You can get it later." "You don't have to." "I want to." I nodded. At the door, he hesitated. "Men?" "Yes." "Thank you," he said again. This time, it sounded deeper, heavier, like it carried more than just gratitude for a meal. I went back to my apartment with empty hands and a full chest. That night, there was no crying through the wall. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt shared. We didn't talk much after that. Not because there was nothing to say, but because neither of us felt the need to rush words into spaces where silence already felt safe. Our time together settled into something unspoken, something gentle. It didn't ask questions, it didn't demand explanations, it simply existed. Sometimes we ate together. I'd knock with food, or he'd knock with the container cleaned and filled with something simple he'd managed to make himself. Soup, usually. Rice. Things that didn't require much standing. We'd sit at the small table, knees almost touching, the room filled with the quiet rhythm of eating. Other times we didn't eat at all. We just sat. The window stayed slightly open, letting in the distant noise of the city. Traffic rolling by, someone laughing 2 buildings over, the faint echo of life happening somewhere else. The sounds flowed into the room and out again, like a reminder that the world was still moving, even when we weren't. Jay would sit on the couch, shoulders slightly hunched, hands folded in his lap. I'd sit beside him, close enough to feel his warmth, far enough not to crowd him. We watched the light change on the walls as evening turned into night. It felt strange how natural it all was. No awkward introductions, no forced conversations, no need to pretend to be more okay than we actually were. Sometimes I'd glance at him when he thought I wasn't looking. He always held his stomach when he stood up. Not dramatically, not as if in pain, protectively. Like his body remembered something his mind was still learning. There was something inside him that mattered more than fear, more than exhaustion, something fragile, something precious. Once he caught me watching. Embarrassment flickered across his face. He shifted, withdrawing his hand slightly. "Sorry," he muttered. "It's just habit." "You don't have to apologize," I said quickly. "It makes sense." He studied me for a moment, like he was weighing whether to believe that. Then his hand returned to where it had been, fingers pressing lightly as if reassured by my words. Another time, as we stood from the table together, he winced slightly. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he replied, too fast. Then he sighed. "Just tired." I wanted to say, "You don't have to be strong all the time," but I didn't. People say that too easily, without understanding how much effort it takes to survive when strength feels like the only option. So instead, I said, "Sit, I'll clean up." He looked like he might argue. Then he nodded. "Thank you." Those words passed between us often now, softly, frequently, like acknowledgments rather than debts. Sometimes he talked. Not about the past, never about the father, not about the future either. Just small things. The way he liked his tea slightly too sweet, how he hated the sound of alarms, how rain made him sleepy. I listened. Sometimes I talked too. About work, about how my mother used to insist silence meant something was wrong, about how I liked the city at night more than during the day. He listened then. No advice, no interruptions, just presence. That might have been the most surprising part. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone simply sat with me, without asking me to perform or explain myself. With Jay, I didn't have to be interesting or useful. I just had to be there. Late one evening, as I stood to leave, Jay stood with me. He pressed his hand to his stomach again. This time his eyes softened. "He's been moving more," he said quietly, almost shy. I smiled. "That's a good sign." "I think so too." For a moment, we stood side by side, both listening. Not to the city this time, but to the quiet life growing between us, unnamed and unasked for, yet unmistakably real. When I returned to my apartment that night, I noticed something. The sound through the wall was gone. Not replaced by laughter, not replaced by joy, but replaced by something gentler. Peace, maybe. Or the simple relief of not being alone. And somehow, that was enough.
It happened on a night that felt ordinary. No storm, no heavy air, just the quiet kind of evening that slipped by unnoticed. We sat on a couch with the lights low, the city outside blinking softly through the window, like it didn't want to intrude. Jay stared at the floor, tracing slow lines on his thigh with his fingers.
I could tell something was sitting heavy in him. The silence felt different, thicker. Not uncomfortable, but restless. The kind that builds when words press too close to the surface. Then he spoke. Not to me, not really. He left when I told him. His voice was flat, emptied of anger or drama, like he'd said it so many times in his head that the pain had dulled into something almost manageable. He said this wasn't part of his future. Jay didn't look at me when he said it. His gaze stayed fixed on a spot on the floor, like if he lifted his eyes, something fragile might break free. I felt something twist inside my chest. There were 100 things I could have said. He didn't deserve you. You're better off. He was wrong. All the right words people say when they don't know what else to do. None of them felt right. So I stayed quiet. I let the silence sit between us, steady and open, giving him space instead of answers. He swallowed, shoulders tightening slightly. I didn't even ask him to stay, Jay continued softly. I just told him, thought he should know. His hands curled into his sleeves. He said he wasn't ready, that his life was finally going somewhere. And then he said, Jay exhaled shakily. He said, maybe I should have been more careful. That was when my jaw tightened. But still, I said nothing. Because this wasn't about my anger. It was about his pain. I don't blame him, Jay added quickly, like he was afraid of something. I mean, I do, but it's easier not to. If I blame him, then I have to face that I trusted him. His voice dropped. And I don't know how to sit with that. The room felt impossibly quiet after that. I didn't reach for him. I didn't interrupt. I just stayed. After a while, Jay let out a slow breath and leaned back against the couch. His eyes finally closed, like admitting the truth had exhausted him more than he'd expected. Sorry, he murmured. I didn't mean to bring this up. You didn't, I said gently. It's okay. He nodded but didn't respond. Minutes passed. Then, without looking at me, he shifted closer, just a few inches. Not asking, not apologizing, just seeking warmth. I didn't move away. Outside, a car passed, its headlights sliding briefly across the ceiling. Then the room was quiet again. Sometimes, silence is the only thing that doesn't hurt. Because silence doesn't deny pain, it doesn't minimize it. It simply stays long enough for someone to breathe again. That night, Jay didn't cry. And neither of us spoke anymore. But something had changed. Because trust, once spoken aloud, has a way of anchoring itself quietly, even when no one names it.
The pain hit suddenly. It tore through the quiet of the night without warning, sharp, unmistakable. A crash against the wall, followed by a sound I'd never heard from Jay before. Not crying, not silence. Fear. It was in his voice when he called out, thin and trembling, like the words barely made it past the tightness in his chest. I was out of bed before my mind caught up with my body. I didn't knock. I just went. The door was unlocked. Inside, the lights were off except for the faint glow from the kitchen. Jay was on the floor, one hand braced against the table leg, the other pressed hard to his stomach. His knees were drawn up awkwardly, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. Tears ran down his face, quiet and continuous, like he'd stopped trying to hide them. "Hey," I said softly, crouching beside him. "I'm here." His eyes found mine immediately, wide and glassy. "I'm scared," he whispered. Not panicked, not dramatic, just honest. The kind of fear that doesn't ask for reassurance, only presence. I took his hand. It was cold, fingers shaking so badly I had to hold them with both of mine to keep them still. His grip tightened instantly, like he'd been waiting for something solid to hold on to. "I'm here," I repeated, slower this time. "You're not alone." His breathing hitched. Another wave of pain passed through him, strong enough to fold him forward. I steadied him, careful, letting him move the way he needed to. "Does it hurt now?" I asked quietly. He nodded, eyes squeezed shut. "Just "Don't let go," he said, voice breaking. "I won't." And I meant it in every possible way. Minutes stretched, then blurred. I counted his breaths out loud when his own rhythm faltered. I reminded him gently to breathe in, breathe out, like anchoring him to something simple and real. His tears slowed. The shaking eased. Eventually, the pain loosened its grip, retreating enough for him to lean back against the cabinet, exhausted. His head tipped forward, resting briefly against my shoulder without him even realizing it. I stayed exactly where I was. His hand was still tangled in mine. "I'm sorry," he murmured weakly, eyes half-lidded. "I didn't want to scare you." "You didn't," I said. "You called me." That seemed to register. He nodded once, swallowing hard. "I didn't know who else to call," he admitted. Something warm and aching spread through my chest at that. "You called the right person," I said, before I could overthink it. We stayed on the floor longer than necessary. There was no rush to move, no urgency, now that the pain had passed. Just quiet breathing, shared gravity. When he was ready, I helped him onto the couch, moving slowly, carefully. I brought him water, a blanket. He accepted everything without protest. But he never let go of my hand. Even when his eyes finally closed, worn out and heavy with sleep, his fingers stayed curled around mine. I sat there, listening to the night wrap back around the apartment. The city hummed. Somewhere, someone laughed. Somewhere else, someone cried. And there we were, on a couch too small for fear, holding on to each other like letting go wasn't an option. I didn't let go. Not when his breathing evened. Not when his hand relaxed but stayed in place. Not when dawn crept faintly through the window. Because some moments, quietly, decide things for you. And that night, without words, something in both of us chose to stay.
After that night, something changed. Not in a dramatic way, not in the way people talk about turning points, where everything before and after is clearly divided. It was quieter than that, more patient, like something inside both of us had shifted just enough to make breathing easier. The storm didn't announce its ending. It simply stopped hurting so loudly. The morning after, light crept into Jay's apartment slowly, touching the edges of the room first. The city outside was already awake, but inside, everything felt suspended, soft, careful, like the world knew better than to rush him. I woke on the couch, my neck stiff, my arm numb where his hand still rested lightly against mine. At some point during the night, his grip had loosened, but he hadn't moved away. Even now, half asleep, his fingers stayed close, curled slightly, as if memory alone held them there. For a moment, I didn't move. I watched him. Jay slept on his side, knees drawn up, one hand tucked protectively over his stomach. His face was calmer than I'd ever seen it. No tightness around his mouth, no tension behind his eyes, just exhaustion, deep and honest. It struck me then how young he looked when he slept. Not fragile, human. I shifted gently, careful not to wake him, and went to the kitchen to make tea. The kettle's soft click felt loud in the quiet apartment. I winced, glancing back toward the couch. Jay stirred, but didn't wake. When I returned, he was opening his eyes, blinking slowly like the day hadn't fully reached him yet. "Morning," I said softly. He looked at me for a long second before answering, like he was checking something inside himself. "Morning," he replied. No apology, no embarrassment, just a calm acknowledgement of what had happened and where we were now. That alone told me everything had changed. He sat up slowly, wincing just a little. I hovered nearby, not touching, letting him decide how much help he wanted. "I'm okay," he said quietly, noticing my posture. "I know," I replied. He nodded, accepting that I wasn't hovering out of panic, but care. We drank tea together at the table. The same table that once felt too empty now held warmth, steam rising in lazy curls between us. Jay wrapped both hands around his mug, staring into it like it might tell him what came next. "I slept," he said after a while, almost surprised. That's good. I mean, properly, he added, without waking up scared. I didn't respond right away. I didn't want to break the weight of what he had just admitted. I'm glad, I said eventually. He took another sip, shoulders relaxing. Later that afternoon, he asked if I could walk with him. He'd need to go to the clinic, he said quickly, eyes flicking away. If you're free. If not, it's fine. I'm free, I said immediately. He blinked. That same look crossed his face again, the one that came when he realized he didn't need to fight so hard to be allowed support. On the walk there, he moved slower than usual. His steps were cautious, measured. I stayed in pace beside him, not rushing, not leading. When the sidewalk grew crowded, my hand hovered instinctively near his elbow, not touching, just present. He noticed, didn't pull away. At one point his balance wavered slightly as a wave of discomfort passed through him. He steadied himself by pressing his hand against my arm, fingers tightening briefly. I didn't comment, didn't make a fuss. I just stayed solid. Inside the clinic, the air smelled like antiseptic and old magazines. Jay hesitated at the doorway, scanning the room like he was bracing himself for judgment. You can wait outside if you want, though his voice lacked conviction. I'll stay, I replied. Relief crossed his face before he could hide it. When the nurse called his name, Jay stood and looked at me instinctively. I stood too. There was something grounding about walking beside him into that room. Like this wasn't something he had to face by himself anymore. Not fear, not responsibility, not the weight of what was growing inside him. Afterwards, we stopped by a small cafe. Jay ordered something warm, something sweet. He leaned back in the chair with a sigh, eyes closing briefly. I'm always tired, he admitted quietly. Your body's doing a lot, I said. Yeah, I guess it is. From then on, days fell into a new rhythm. Not perfect, not easy, but steadier. Jay started leaning on me without apology. Not dramatically, not in a way that asked me to save him. Just enough. He'd ask me to carry groceries when the bags felt too heavy, to sit with him when evenings stretched on too long, to stay when nights felt too quiet and his thoughts got loud. Each time I said yes, not because I felt obligated, not because I expected something in return, but because being there felt right. I showed up without hesitation. One evening I found him sitting on the floor, back against the couch, breathing slowly. Pain? I asked gently. A little, he said. It'll pass. I sat down beside him. Didn't speak, didn't touch unless he reached out first. For a moment he leaned sideways, resting his head lightly against my shoulder. It was small, almost accidental, but it stayed. That night, he didn't pull away when I shifted slightly so he'd be more comfortable. He didn't tense when my arm rested loosely behind him, not holding, just existing. It wasn't love yet. Love announces itself. Love makes promises. This didn't. This was quieter, slower, built in the space between words, not in them. It was trust. Trust that I wouldn't leave when things got hard. Trust that he wouldn't have to apologize for needing rest. Trust that silence didn't mean abandonment anymore. One night, as we sat watching the city lights through the window, Jay spoke again. I keep expecting the ground to disappear, he said softly. Does it? I turned slightly toward him. He shook his head. Not anymore. He hesitated, then added, when you're here. Something tightened in my chest, warm and unfamiliar. You're doing this, I said, not me. He smiled faintly. Maybe, but you make it easier. We sat in that truth for a while. Outside, the city carried on. Cars passed, lights flickered, life moved forward. Inside, we were learning something quieter, how to exist together without fear. After the storm, the world didn't suddenly become gentle, but Jay did. He rested more, laughed occasionally, ate better when I was around, slept longer, trusted deeper. And I realized something about myself too. I wasn't showing up because I felt needed. I was showing up because I wanted to. That frightened me more than anything else. But I didn't pull away. Trust doesn't arrive in a rush. It settles in slowly, staying only when no one tries to force it. And that's what held us together after the storm. Not love. Not yet. Something steadier. Something real.
The days that followed didn't feel special at first. That was what made them special. They arrived quietly, one after another, without asking for attention. No dramatic confessions, no sudden shifts, just ordinary mornings and slow afternoons that felt steadier than anything we'd known in a long time. Jay started sleeping better. Not perfectly. Some nights were still restless, but better. He woke up less afraid, less braced for something terrible to happen the moment he opened his eyes. Sometimes I'd hear him moving around his apartment earlier than usual, the soft clink of a cup against the counter, the sound of water running. Normal sounds. Living sounds. One morning, he knocked on my door. I opened it to find him standing there with his jacket half-zipped, hair still damp, cheeks slightly flushed. "I was thinking," he said, almost shy. "Do you want to come with me today?" "To where?" "There's a store nearby," he replied, eyes flicking away. "They sell baby things." Something warm tightened behind my ribs. "Sure," I said. "Yeah." He let out a breath I don't think he realized he'd been holding. We walked there together, taking our time. The sky was pale, the air cool enough to make us pull our jackets a little tighter. Jay walked slower than usual, but his steps felt lighter, less cautious. The store sat on a quiet street, its windows filled with soft colors and tiny displays. Clothes hung impossibly small on racks. Stuffed animals lined the shelves, their stitched smiles too gentle for the world they'd eventually meet. Jay stopped just inside the door. For a moment I thought he might turn around, but then he took a step forward. And another. He reached out and touched a rack of baby clothes like he wasn't sure they were real. His fingers brushed a sleeve no longer than my hand. "So small," he murmured. "Yeah," I said quietly. "They are." He picked one up, a pale yellow onesie, and held it against his chest. His lips parted slightly, his eyes fixed on nothing at all. I keep forgetting that someone's actually going to wear this. I watched his face carefully, not to protect myself, but to understand him. The fear that usually lingered behind his eyes wasn't gone, but it wasn't in control anymore. We walked deeper into the store. Jay moved from rack to rack, slow and thoughtful. He touched fabrics, read tiny labels, paused often, like he was letting himself absorb every detail. Then he frowned. "He don't know what I'm doing," he admitted. "No one does. That's kind of the rule." That earned me a small smile. We stood in front of a row of baby clothes arranged by color. Blue, green, white, pastel pink. Jay reached toward the blue, but then hesitated. "I don't want people to assume about who the baby should be." "They will," I said gently, "no matter what you choose." He sighed. "I know. I want to choose something that feels right, not something that feels like pressure." He picked up a soft green sweater, then a white one, then a pale gray. He looked at me. "What do you think?" I shrugged lightly. "I think your kid's gonna look good in whatever you choose, especially if you choose it." He studied me for a moment, then nodded, satisfied. We argued over colors. Not seriously, just enough to be real. "You always go for neutral," I said, as he placed another beige item into the basket. "It's calming," he replied defensively. "It's boring." I gasped softly. "It's peaceful." "Peaceful can still have color."
He laughed, actually laughed, quiet and surprised, like the sound escaped before fear could stop it. That laugh stayed with me. We found ourselves in front of the socks next. Tiny socks. Ridiculously tiny. Jay picked one up between his fingers, holding it delicately like it might dissolve. "How is this real?" he asked. I took one from the shelf and placed it against my fingertip. It barely reached my first knuckle. "That," I said solemnly, "is what terror looks like." He stared at it, then snorted before he could stop himself. The sound startled him more than it startled me. I didn't mean to," he started. "It's okay," I said quickly. "You're allowed to laugh." He smiled now, softer, and nodded. "Look at this one," he said, holding up a pair with tiny embroidered stars. "They don't even look like socks. They look like decorations. They're smaller than decorations." He laughed again, this time easier. Other shoppers passed us, some smiling faintly, some not paying attention at all. A woman nearby glanced at Jay's stomach, then at me, and smiled in that quiet, knowing way people do when they think they've understood a story. I wondered briefly what they thought we were, then realized it didn't matter. At the checkout counter, Jay hesitated again as the clerk began ringing up the items. "Is this too much?" he asked quietly. I looked into the basket. A handful of clothes, socks, a soft blanket. "No," I said. "It's just enough for today." That seemed to satisfy him. Outside, the sky had shifted to a pale afternoon blue. Jay held the shopping bag carefully, like its contents were fragile in ways fabric shouldn't be. We sat on a bench nearby to rest. He placed the bag beside him and leaned back, eyes drifting closed. "I never thought I'd feel happy. About this," he said suddenly. His voice wasn't trembling, it wasn't defensive. Just honest. I turned to look at him. "I thought it would always feel heavy, like every reminder would make me panic, like I'd wake up scared every day until the end." He opened his eyes and looked at me. "But today, it didn't." I watched him carefully. "I'm glad you do," I said. He smiled then, not small, not careful. Real. That smile stayed with me longer than anything else from that day. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. We walked home slowly, stopped for something warm to drink, talked about nothing important, yet it all felt important. Back at the apartment, Jay laid the clothes out neatly on the couch, smoothing each piece like it mattered, like it meant something beyond what it was. "I used to think happiness had to be loud," he said softly. "Like, if it wasn't overwhelming, it wasn't real." I sat beside him. "Sometimes it's just quiet relief." He nodded. "I like that better." That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something I hadn't said out loud, not even to myself. These small days were changing me too. I wasn't waiting for the crying through the wall anymore. I wasn't bracing for fear. I was looking forward to tiny moments, shared meals, soft laughter, the way Jay's face lit up over ordinary things. And it scared me. Because ordinary things don't feel like much, until you realize how much you'd miss them if they were gone. That was the danger of small, happy days. They taught you what you had to lose. But, for the first time, neither of us was running from that truth. We were sitting in it. Together.
It happened on an ordinary evening. That was how most of the important things seemed to happen with us. Quietly, without warning, disguised as something small. The sky outside had already darkened, the city lights flickering on one by one like they always did. Jay was sitting on the edge of the couch, folding the tiny clothes we'd bought earlier that week. He did it slowly, carefully, like every movement mattered, like rushing would somehow break the moment. I was leaning against the doorframe, watching him. Not in a dramatic way, just
taking him in. The curve of his back as he bent forward slightly. The way one hand kept drifting to his stomach without conscious thought. Protective. Gentle. "How do people do this every day?" he murmured, holding up a tiny shirt. "Just live normally when something like this is happening inside you." Maybe they stop thinking of it as something big. Maybe it just becomes part of them. He considered that, then nodded slowly. Maybe. He folded the shirt and set it aside. Then suddenly, his movement stilled. I noticed immediately. "Jay?" I said. He didn't answer at first. His eyes widened slightly, his hand pressing more firmly against his stomach. Then he looked up at me. "Min," he said softly. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard before. Not fear. Not panic. Wonder. He reached for me before he spoke again. "Come here." I crossed the room in 2 steps. He took my hand, his fingers warm, a little shaky. "Feel this." He guided my hand gently, carefully, to his stomach. For a brief second, there was nothing. Just warmth. Just the steady rise and fall of his breathing beneath my palm. I was acutely aware of how intimate the gesture was. How easily he could have kept this moment to himself. I swallowed. Then, a small, unmistakable movement pressed against my hand. Not strong, not sharp, but real. My breath caught so suddenly it almost hurt. The baby kicked. My mind went blank. All the noise inside me, thoughts, fears, distance, collapsed into a single overwhelming sensation. Something alive. Something purposeful. Something that wasn't abstract anymore. It wasn't just an idea. It wasn't a future problem or a responsibility. It was here. A life. Something tight in my chest broke open. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until Jay spoke. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. I looked at his face. He was watching me closely, eyes searching mine, waiting for something, approval, reassurance, maybe even rejection. His mouth was set in a careful line, like he was braced for me to pull away. I shook my head. Not because I wasn't okay, because words weren't working. I nodded instead. Slowly, firmly. "Yeah," I said. My voice came out rougher than I expected. More than okay. Another small movement followed, softer this time, like a question. I felt it again, and something inside me shifted permanently. Jay exhaled, relief washing over his features. "I was worried," he admitted. "Some people get uncomfortable or scared." "I am scared," I said honestly. His eyes widened slightly. But not in a bad way, just in a real way. He let out a shaky laugh. "That makes 2 of us." We stayed like that for a long moment. My hand resting on his stomach, his hand lightly covering mine. The room felt impossibly quiet, like the world had leaned in closer without us noticing. I realized then how much trust he was giving me. This wasn't just a shared experience. This was an invitation. Jay swallowed. It doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes hours pass and there's nothing. And then suddenly, as if summoned by his words, the baby moved again. A little stronger this time. Jay's eyes softened instantly. "There!" he whispered, smiling without realizing it. "That one's new." "That one?" I echoed, faintly. "Yeah." He looked down at his stomach. "Some feel different, like they have moods already." I huffed out a quiet laugh. "Already stubborn?" He shot me a look. "You don't know that." "I do," I replied. Anyone who kicks this much has opinions. That made him laugh properly. God, that sound. He leaned back on the couch cushions, guiding me to sit beside him without letting go. We adjusted until it was comfortable, our shoulders touching, my hand still where it was. I was acutely aware of everything. The warmth of his skin through his clothes, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the faint tension in his muscles that hadn't disappeared entirely because fear never vanishes completely, no matter how safe you feel. I used to talk to him when I was alone. Talk to who? I asked, though I already knew. The baby. He shrugged, almost embarrassed. When things were really bad, when I thought I wouldn't make it through the night without breaking down. I didn't interrupt. I didn't know if it mattered, or if it was stupid. But I'd say things like, "I'm trying," or "I hope you forgive me." My chest tightened. For what? I asked quietly. For being scared, he said. For not feeling ready. For wishing sometimes that things had turned out differently. I turned to him. That doesn't make you a bad parent. He looked at me skeptically. That makes you human. His eyes shimmered, but he didn't look away. I don't want to do this alone. The words hung between us. I could have pretended they didn't mean much. I could have answered vaguely, safely. But the truth had been building inside me long before this moment. I know, I said. You don't have to. He searched my face again, really searched this time. Are you sure? He asked. Because I can't afford for this to be something temporary. I can't watch you get close and then disappear. I didn't look away. I'm not here by accident, and I'm not leaving. The baby kicked again, harder this time. Jay laughed through the sudden tears that spilled over him. I think they agree, he said, brushing a hand over his face. I smiled, my own eyes burning. For a long time we stayed there. No rush, no need to define anything. Just breath, just warmth, just proof of life beneath my hand and between us. Later that night, after I returned to my apartment, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I pressed my hand against my own chest, trying to steady my heartbeat. I had felt something change tonight. Not just between us, but inside me. I wasn't just protecting Jay anymore. I was attached. To the future he was carrying. To the quiet life we were building out of small moments. To the sound of laughter where fear used to live. And for the first time in my life, that kind of attachment didn't feel like a weakness. It felt like purpose. The wall between our apartments felt thinner now. Not because of sound, but because of trust. I knew that whatever came next wouldn't be easy, but I also knew this. When Jade took my hand and said, "Feel this," he wasn't just sharing a kick. He was letting me step fully into his world. And I had.
It started happening without ceremony. A cashier smiled at us and said, "You two look tired. Parenthood does that." A neighbor in the elevator asked, "When's the baby due?" and then added, without missing a beat, "You must be excited," while looking at both of us. A nurse at the clinic handed me a form and said, "Dad can fill this out." Each time there was a pause, a quiet, fragile second where reality hovered, waiting to see how we'd handle it. Jay always corrected them quickly. "Oh, no," he'd say, polite but firm. "We're not a couple. He's just helping me out." Just. The word never sounded small when it left his mouth. It sounded careful, defensive, like something placed gently between us so neither of us would trip over it. I never corrected anyone. Not because I wanted to lie, but because, somewhere along the way, the truth had grown complicated. After the first time it happened, I expected it to feel awkward, embarrassing, like stepping into someone else's story by mistake, but instead it felt warm, familiar, as if strangers were noticing something we hadn't dared to name. Jay, on the other hand, seemed unsettled by it. On the walk home from one appointment, he was quieter than usual. His shoulders were tight, his hand gripping the strap of his bag like he needed something solid to hold on to. "They shouldn't assume," he said suddenly. "No," I agreed. "They shouldn't." He glanced at me, searching my face like he was checking for disappointment. "You don't mind, do you, when I correct them?" I answered honestly, "No." That was true. What I didn't say was that I mind the way his voice changed when he did it. Softer, but sharper too, like he was cutting a line in the air and telling himself not to cross it. That night, he invited me to stay for dinner. Not because he needed help, not because something hurt, just because. He stood at the stove, stirring a pot with careful attention, while I sat at the small kitchen table, scrolling aimlessly on my phone and pretending I wasn't watching him. "You don't have to stay every night," he said without turning around. "I know. You don't live here." "I know that too." He sighed, resting the spoon against the pot. "I don't want you to feel trapped or obligated." I leaned back in my chair. "Do I look trapped to you?" He finally turned to face me. His expression was conflicted, not unhappy, just full, like his thoughts were stacking on top of each other faster than he could sort them. "I don't want people to think you're responsible for me, or for this." I stood and crossed the room, stopping a careful distance from him. "I choose to be here," I said. "No one's forcing me." "I know." He looked down at his hands. "That's what scares me." The words landed softly, but they stayed. Dinner passed in relative quiet after that. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. The kind of silence that meant both of us were listening to our own hearts a little too closely. Later, as we sat on the couch, Jay dozing lightly beside me, his head tilted just enough to brush my shoulder, I felt it again, that creeping sense that we were standing at the edge of something unnamed. I didn't move. Neither did he. When he woke, he looked momentarily confused, then relaxed when he realized where he was. "Sorry, did I fall asleep on you?" "Yeah." He sat up quickly. "I didn't mean to," I interrupted. "It's fine, really." He hesitated, then slowly settled back, this time upright, but still close enough that our arms touched. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not making things weird." I smiled faintly. "We're way past weird." That earned him a small laugh. The truth was, things were changing. I noticed it in the way he'd text me when I wasn't home. Nothing urgent, just comments about something he'd seen or a thought he wanted to share. I noticed it in the way he saved me the last of whatever he'd cooked, even when he was clearly still hungry. I noticed it in myself, too, in how my first instinct when something good or bad happened was to tell him, in how I'd start planning my evenings assuming I'd see him without even realizing I was doing it. Worst of all, I noticed it in how empty my apartment felt when I stayed there alone. At night, lying in my own bed, the silence felt wrong, too clean, too untouched. I missed the sound of him moving around next door, missed the way our quiet overlapped without effort. I wondered when that had happened. When Jay had stopped being the neighbor, when he had started feeling like home. It scared me more than I wanted to admit, because home is something you lose. One evening, while folding laundry together, Jay paused mid-motion. "People keep thinking we're together," he said again. "Yeah." "Do you ever wonder why?" I met his eyes. "Do you?" He swallowed. "Sometimes." The air between us tightened. "I don't want to mislead anyone, or let things get confusing." "Are they confusing?" I asked gently. He looked away. "I don't know." That was the answer, really. We were growing too close, not in obvious ways, not with stolen kisses or dramatic confessions,
but in the quiet accumulation of shared days, in the familiarity that made leaving harder each time. That night, as I stood by his door getting ready to go back to my place, he hesitated. "You can stay, if you want. The couch is fine. I just sleep better when I'm not alone." I studied him for a moment. Not for weakness, not for need, for honesty. "I'll stay," I said. He smiled, relieved, grateful, a little afraid. As I lay on the couch later, listening to him moving around in the bedroom, I stared up at the ceiling and let the truth settle. We weren't pretending. And that was the problem, because pretending would have been safer. Growing close is easy. Staying, when it would hurt less to pull away, that's when things get dangerous. And somewhere between the baby kicks, the shared meals, the mistaken assumptions, and the nights that ended without goodbyes, we had crossed a line. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both felt it. And I didn't know yet whether that made us brave or doomed.
It was late. Not the dramatic kind of late, where everything feels broken and sharp, but the quiet kind, where the world slows down enough for thoughts you've been avoiding to finally catch you. The lights were low, the city outside hummed softly, distant and indifferent. Jay sat beside me on the couch, knees drawn slightly inward, hands resting on his stomach like they always did now, protective, familiar. We'd been watching something neither of us was really paying attention to. The words came suddenly, soft, unplanned. "What if I'm not enough?" I turned toward him at once. "For who?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. His gaze stayed fixed ahead, unfocused, like he was looking through the wall instead of at it. "For the baby," he said finally. Then, almost as an afterthought, "for anyone who might love me." There it was. Fear finally finding its voice. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. I shut the screen off without asking. The room fell fully quiet. I shifted closer, enough that he could feel me without being crowded. "When did you start thinking that?" I asked. He gave a small, humorless smile. "I think I always have." He swallowed, fingers tightening slightly against the fabric of his shirt. "Every time I mess something up, every time I get tired too easily, every time I feel afraid instead of strong." His voice wavered, but he kept going. "I think, if I can't even do this right, how am I supposed to be someone a child needs?" I watched his hands as he spoke. Hands that folded baby clothes with reverence. Hands that shook but never let go when pain hit. Hands that reached for me, not out of entitlement, but trust. "You know what scares me the most?" he whispered. I shook my head. "That one day the baby will look at me and realize I'm not what they deserve. That they'll grow up wishing someone else had been their parent." The room felt smaller around his words. I turned fully toward him. "Look at me," I said gently. He hesitated, then met my eyes. "You already are enough," I said. He frowned slightly, disbelief flickering across his face. "You don't know that." "I do," I said calmly, "because I see what you don't." He exhaled shakily. "Men, you worry. You stay up at night thinking about whether you're doing things wrong. You feel guilty for being scared. You wonder if love is something you have to earn." I leaned in closer. "People who aren't enough don't do that." His eyes filled, but he didn't look away. "You think being enough means never being afraid. But it doesn't. Being enough means showing up even when you are afraid." His lips parted, but no words came. "For the baby," I added softer now, "you're already showing up. Every day. With patience, with care, with honesty." He shook his head faintly. "What if love isn't enough?" I reached out, covering his hand with mine. "Love is the part that stays, even when everything else changes." Tears slipped free then, quiet ones. He didn't wipe them away. "I don't know how to let people love me," he admitted. "Every time someone gets close, I'm waiting for the moment they realize I'm too much, or not enough, or both." I squeezed his hand. "What if they don't?" I asked. He laughed weakly. "That feels impossible."
It felt impossible to you that you'd ever be happy about this, I said, nodding toward his stomach. And yet. He followed my gaze. His hand moved automatically, protective, tender. I still get scared, he whispered. So do I said. That surprised him. He looked at me sharply. You do? Yeah, I admitted. I'm scared of wanting things that could disappear. I'm scared of how much this matters to me. To you? He echoed. I didn't dodge it this time. Yes. His breathing stuttered. I'm scared, I continued, because you matter. Because the baby matters. Because walking away would hurt now. He searched my face, something fragile unraveling inside him. Why? Why do you matter so much to me? I answered honestly. Because you let me see you. Not the version of yourself you think you should be, but the real one. And I chose to stay. His shoulders trembled as he finally broke, leaning forward, forehead resting lightly on my shoulder. I'm so tired, he whispered. I wrapped my arms around him without hesitation. I know. I don't want to fail, he said, voice muffled. I don't want to ruin this. You won't, I said firmly. He pulled back just enough to look at me. How can you be so sure? Because you care, and because you're not alone anymore. That last part hit him hardest. He stared at me like he was afraid to believe it. You're not alone, I repeated. Not with the fear, not with the responsibility, not with love. The baby kicked softly between us. Jay let out a breath that turned into a broken laugh. They're always interrupting emotional moments, he said, wiping his face. I smiled faintly. Good timing. He rested his head back against the couch, exhausted but lighter. For the record, I'm still afraid, he said quietly. I nodded. That's okay. He glanced at me. You're really not going anywhere, are you? I didn't answer right away. I reached for his hand, interlaced our fingers. Fear has a voice, but it doesn't get the last word. His grip tightened. For the first time, he didn't ask for reassurance again. He leaned into the quiet, and for once, fear listened.
It happened without planning. No build-up, no promise, no sudden realization that demanded a name. Just a moment that stretched longer than it should have. We were standing in the kitchen, shoulder to shoulder, waiting for water to boil. The clock ticked loudly, filling the silence where words usually lived. Jay was leaning back against the counter, one hand resting on his stomach, the other hanging loosely at his side. I turned to say something ordinary, forgettable. He did too. Our gazes met and stayed. There was nothing dramatic about it. No rush of heat, no spark that set the room on fire. Just awareness, sudden and undeniable. Like realizing you'd been standing too close to the edge without noticing. A second passed. Then another. His breath caught slightly, not enough to be obvious, just enough for me to hear it. The air between us felt different, thicker, charged in a way that made moving feel like a mistake. I could have looked away. I thought about it. But I didn't. His eyes searched mine with that familiar uncertainty, like he was waiting for permission or maybe forgiveness, like he was bracing for the moment to shatter if he acknowledged it. My chest tightened. Slowly, carefully, his hand shifted. Not reaching, not demanding, just finding. His fingers brushed mine first, tentative as a question. I felt the contact all the way down to my bones. Neither of us pulled away. The water boiled over on the stove, forgotten. Jay's fingers curled slightly, enough to hold without gripping, to stay without claiming. I let my hand respond, turning just enough to meet his. The silence roared. He swallowed. Min. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a confession. It was my name spoken like he was testing how it felt to say in this new way. I answered by staying. That seemed to be permission enough. He didn't lean in, didn't close the distance between our faces. Instead, he held my hand more firmly, grounding himself in that small connection like he was afraid of losing balance. "This feels dangerous," he whispered. It happened later that night, not immediately after the moment in the kitchen, not while our hands were still warm from holding each other's. It waited, let us breathe again, let the weight of what almost happened settle into something gentler. Jay was sitting on the edge of the bed, folding one of the tiny blankets we hadn't decided where to store yet. I stood in the doorway, watching him with a feeling I didn't know what to do with. He wasn't tense. That alone felt new. When he noticed me, he smiled faintly, not cautious, just open. "I was thinking," he said. "That can't be good," I teased quietly. He huffed a soft laugh. "Probably not." He set the blanket aside and looked at me properly then. His expression grew serious, but not frightened. "I don't want to rush," he said. I stepped closer. "We don't have to." The words landed between us easily. No push, no pull. Just space. "I'm scared that if we go too fast, I'll panic, or mess it up, or forget how lucky I am." I reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted. He didn't. "Then we go slow," I said. "At your pace." His shoulders eased, relief washing through him. "You really mean that?" "Yes." He studied my face like he was searching for pressure, expectation, anything that might trap him. He didn't find it. "I've never had someone wait," he admitted. "Everyone always seems in a hurry to define things, to want something from me before I figured out how to give it." I stood directly in front of him now, close enough to feel his breath. "I don't want to take anything," I said. "I just want to be here." Something fragile softened in his eyes. Slowly, he stood up. We were so close now there was no room for hesitation, only honesty. He lifted his hand, stopping just short of my chest, waiting. I nodded. He rested his palm there gently, like he was reminding himself I was real. Then, almost without thinking, I leaned forward, pressed my forehead to his. The contact was light, intimate in its restraint. We breathed together. His eyes closed briefly, a shiver moving through him like he'd been holding himself still for too long. "This feels safe," he murmured. "It is." The word felt solid between us. Love didn't need to be loud. It didn't need grand declarations or sweeping gestures or promises shouted into the dark. It lived quietly, in the way he relaxed into the closeness, in the way my hand steadied him without caging him. I don't know what comes next," he said softly. "Neither do I." He smiled. "That's oddly comforting." We stayed like that for a long time. No pressure to move, no need to prove anything. Just the quiet certainty of two people choosing care over fear. When we finally stepped back, nothing felt broken by the distance. If anything, it felt stronger. "Good night," he said, lingering. "Good night."
As I turned toward the couch, his fingers brushed mine again, just once. Not to stop me, just to remind me he was there. Later, in the dark, I stared up at the ceiling and let the truth settle fully. We hadn't said "I love you," but love had already spoken. In the pauses, in the patience, in the decision to protect what was growing instead of rushing to claim it. And that felt more real than anything loud ever could.